The universe of Battle Spirits Saga is teeming with vibrant lore and is a testament to the power of imagination and strategy. Dive deeper into the lore and discover the intricate relationships between its characters. If you find value in our content, show your appreciation by subscribing, liking, and pressing the notification bell. This helps us bring more of this epic universe to you and helps our small channel greatly. Now let's dive into the lore of ancient heroes.
The birth of an empire unifying the entire world for the first time in history is also the story of two heroes, Kei, the first emperor, and Manaka, the God-Slayer hero. The history of the founding of the empire is chronicled in this supplemental imperial chronicle, The Eve of Empire. Follow along as we unravel the paths taken by these two heroes. The nation of Blaze Aegis rose to power within what would later become the realm of Flame, eventually exerting control upon a majority of its lands. Moves toward unification took hold among the other realms as various smaller nations established their authority in reaction to this new threat. As power struggles within the individual realms subsided, ambitions continued to swell. Newly established leaders quickly shifted focus toward their neighbors in the other dominions, plunging the world into an era of frequent, large-scale conflicts among the realms. During that violent century following the birth of Blaze Aegis and leading up to unification, each of those 6 new nations established among the 6 realms adopted a coat of arms in the form of a shield as their emblem, along with the names Blaze Aegis, Dark Aegis, Light Aegis, Ice Aegis, Wind Aegis, and Ocean Aegis. One school of thought aptly calls this the 6 Ages era. But within this record, we will adopt the more orthodox historical perspective of referring to it as the Warring Nations era.
As I recall, I was 9 when Blaze Aegis dispatched me to the nation of Dark Aegis as ambassador. Looking back on that period, it is easy to understand how general apprehension and resistance toward my young age could have led to the reactions I received. However, in what many would call a stereotypically audacious show of youthful impertinence, I kept my head held high and faced their criticisms with aplomb.
In the year 14th pre-Empire, as the Warring Nations era came to a close, a military alliance between Blaze Aegis and Dark Aegis was established. A pledge of both mutual non-aggression and military cooperation. This alliance initially came as a shock to the remaining 4 realms. Feelings of relief soon followed, however, when it became clear that the nature of this alliance was to focus primarily on defense. Rebellion had broken out among the pterosaurs in the nation of Blaze Aegis, demanding the attention of its leaders and tying up resources for waging war outside their borders. This rebellion encouraged Blaze Aegis to actively pursue an alliance. While historically significant, the Blaze Aegis Dark Aegis alliance itself takes backstage in the annals of history to the first appearance of Kei, who would eventually become founding emperor. In the wake of distinguished efforts subjugating the pterosaurs, Kei was chosen to represent Blaze Aegis in their first alliance and immediately dispatched to Dark Aegis. The young ambassador had just turned 9 at the time, and a prestigious family background did little to counter the apparent audacity of the appointment. However, Kei would successfully carry out that weighty mission and eventually prove the skeptics wrong. Negotiation, information gathering, and a keen grasp of your allies' populace are the cornerstones to making a good alliance ambassador. And within 3 months after arriving, everyone came to recognize Kei's talent in these areas. Well known for fairness and impartiality, it seems Kei was more trusted by the local denizens than their own government officials were. 3 years later, when the ambassadorship term ended, historical records describe a mountain of signed petitions being collected, all calling for Kei's reinstatement.
Manaka could be seen engaging the enemy's supreme commander in single combat on the distant horizon. already showing more potential than my own master, Lord Dragon, he came away with a splendid victory. Such deeds were sure to prove him a worthy servant.
Those 5 years of world peace enjoyed by all following the Blaze Dark Aegis alliance were abruptly shattered when the military forces of Ice Aegis invaded Blaze Aegis. They were eventually driven back in failure by a Blaze Aegis victory at that decisive battle which took place in the Valley of the Pterosaurs. It was during this engagement that the hero Manaka first showed his potential. Seen merely as Chamberlain to the General Lord Dragon at the time, Manaka was in truth a genius who had studied under the general since early childhood. Lord Dragon's 3 closest retainers all anticipated that he would one day surpass his master. The final stage of the engagement came when Manaka and Lord Dragon split up to attack the enemy's main forces in a pincer maneuver. Critical to their success was the moment when Manaka reached enemy headquarters first and proceeded to assault it without waiting for reinforcements. After beating a path through their camp, he bested their supreme commander in a heroic one-on-one battle. Manaka's actions delivered Blaze Aegis to victory as the leaderless Ice Aegis forces immediately began to collapse. Recognition for his deeds eluded Manaka at the time, however, as it was awarded to his commanding officer, Lord Dragon, instead leaving Manaka in relative anonymity. Only those who were there to witness his heroic deeds on the battlefield would recognize him as Lord Dragon's strongest warrior and grow to admire him for it. The fact that Kay also took part in this engagement as one of the generals is often overlooked, and no record remains of Kay encountering Manaka in battle. It was not until 2 years later, during the Battle of Sekigaya, when these two heroes would truly be tied together by fate.
The common perception is that Manaka and I were constantly together, but in truth, we only fought together once at the Battle of Sekigaya. On loan from Lord Dragon, Manaka proved to be even more heroic than I had previously imagined possible. As Supreme Commander, I gave very little direction, yet Manaka enacted my will with surprising detail. When left alone, Manaka would defeat one enemy after another according to my wishes. Fighting had never before felt so easy, nor would it ever again.
Apparently done licking their wounds from the Pterosaur engagement, 2 years later, Ice Aegis once again invaded Blaze Aegis. In a repeat of their previous attempt, this plot also ended in failure after they were repelled. Ice Aegis entered Blaze Aegis territory at Sekigaya, and hostilities had only barely begun when Ice Aegis ended up being pushed back. Kay was Supreme Commander for Blaze Aegis. During the fighting, Kay placed Manaka, who had steadily been rising to prominence, in a direct chain of command. And together, the two of them triumphed over the forces of Ice Aegis with a synergy that left fellow allied generals standing in the wings. It was then that Kay and Manaka both realized that the other was an individual they could sympathize with and consider an equal. Historical anecdotes about the pledge of friendship and fidelity they made while observing from high ground as the Ice Aegis forces retreated known as the Victory Oath persist even to this very day.
Year 4. Pre-Empire, the Void Lord upheaval. Despite the loss of his master, Lord Dragon, Manaka fought on, soon toppling a fourth Void Lord. I can still hear those denizens of Dark Aegis cheering in jubilation upon triumphant return. Godslayer, they had begun to call him, and the memory of their voices chanting both this new epithet and Manaka's name never fails to set my heart racing.
This was the year when disaster struck the world, the reappearance of the Void Lords, 6 incarnations of destruction previously known only from ancient legends. Whereas invasions were undertaken to capture and control land from neighbors, it seemed the Void Lords came with the sole intention of laying waste. Some records claim nearly 1/10 of the world's territory was lost to this devastation in the year between when they first appeared and when they were finally vanquished. To this day, the mechanism behind their revival remains a mystery, and the threat they pose remains a distinct reality. one individual was almost entirely responsible for bringing an end to the upheaval: the hero Manaka. Records tell us Lord Dragon defeated the first Void Lord within the borders of Blaze Aegis. However, Manaka was also present, and his participation is easy to imagine. Soon after, Lord Dragon fell victim to the Void Lord within Wind Aegis before it was finally crushed. Lord Dragon's three closest retainers joined Manaka as he continued felling the Void Lords in Ocean Aegis and Dark Aegis, and finally in Light Aegis. Although historically credited with 4, if one includes the Void Lord in Blaze Aegis, attributed to Lord Dragon, Manaka defeated 5 of the 6 Void Lords. It is not difficult to understand why he is considered the greatest hero of the Warring Nations era.
If you're enjoying the lore so far, please take a moment to hit that subscribe button. This video took many hours to prepare, and your support would be greatly appreciated. Now back to our story.
Manaka had saved the world and won the hearts of the masses, and they began calling him the Godslayer Imperator. The title Imperator had become a common appellation given to accomplished generals during the Warring Nations era. While the populace addressed Manaka as such, he never personally acknowledged the honor, and in later years they recognized his discomfort and dropped it in favor of the simpler Godslayer. Since Tokiwa, one of the 3 who aided Manaka, would later be recognized as the Godslayer Hero Reborn, it's hypothesized that Manaka passed along some of his knowledge to Tokiwa.
Year 3, the Imperator's long march begins. Manaka had earned my absolute trust, and his loss left me in deep despair, not to mention blatantly furious with myself and the world at large. My only answer was to change it for the better. The world had to be unified.
Waiting at the conclusion of the Void Lord upheaval was news of Godslayer Imperator Manaka's loss. His voice had fallen silent. At the same time, he took down the final Void Lord in Light Aegis. A severed left arm was all that made the journey back to Blaze Aegis, where Kay waited for his return. Despair eventually led to anger, which prodded Kay into action. The angry Kay began by seizing power within Blaze Aegis, whose central authority was in disarray following the Void Lord upheaval. The Void Lord in Blaze Aegis had been the first to fall, and compared to Blaze Aegis's neighbors, their might remained relatively intact. Once in charge, Kay immediately set their military sights on Ice Aegis. Of all the nations, Ice Aegis had been left the absolute weakest after fighting off their Void Lord without the assistance of Manaka. With their own governing body in tatters, Ice Aegis practically welcomed Kay's authority with open arms, abandoning their national identity to be merged with Blaze Aegis. On the eve of Ice Aegis's annexation, Kay embarked on a fight to unify the entire world. In the history books of Blaze Aegis, this endeavor is simply called the Great Unification, but the road leading to its completion was more commonly referred to as the Imperator's Long March. Although what-ifs are considered taboo in the study of history, one cannot help but wonder if that world in chaos would have quickly fallen into line had Godslayer hero Manaka been at Kay's side. In reality, the position would be filled by a military advisor from the nation of Ocean Aegis named Zeon. Theories that Zeon enticed a despondent Kay into aggression are simply not true. Kay was enraged with the world for taking Manaka away and fed up with its present state. In Kay's eyes, that world had to change, and without question, the decision to act came from within. History does support the role Zeon played in skillfully influencing Kay at the time, however, turning the Blaze Aegis leader toward militarism. Documents have been found which show his intent to wear Kay down and stir up hatred among the populace with excessive military conflicts.
I do not believe it was his intention to confront Blaze Aegis. All those impoverished denizens who gathered around him in adoration simply left him with no choice. He may have agreed with Kay's ideals, but he could not abide the Blaze Aegis leader's tactics, and so be accepted command of the Five-Nation Alliance.
With Kay at the helm, Blaze Aegis became a tremendous force, and in barely a year had gained near complete control over the world. Only the nation of Wind Aegis remained, favoring sternly applied military force over more thoughtful negotiations clearly helped Kay set the pace. It is difficult to reconcile all of the blood spilled in the accomplishment of Kay's goal, which was supposedly a world unified and at peace. Kay continued down that bloody path, listening to Zayn's constant reminders about how great accomplishments were only achieved at the cost of great sacrifice and much suffering. Although logical from a leader's perspective, such arguments were intolerable for those whose lives were directly affected.
Year 1. The Imperator's Great War. A report from the Angels of Light Aegis came in. The enemy's main force had been pushed back. I remember looking around a moment later and realizing that Manaka had vanished. We had only talked about making that now famous surprise attack, and he had already accomplished it, leaving the rest of us in his wake. A lot is said about Manaka's prowess in combat, but the strength of his convictions and his quick decision-making are what really made him strong.
Blaze Aegis wasted no time invading the stronghold of the Five-Nation Alliance. Their establishment had gathered anti-Blaze Aegis sentiment into one location, and crushing them now would remove all threats of organized resistance. While allowing them to gather made that more difficult, it also saved Blaze Aegis the effort of crushing them individually. Naturally, Kay was confident of victory, even facing Manaka. Thus began the Imperator's Great War, pitting those two heroes and sworn comrades against one another. It was Manaka's goal to remove the false confidant at Kay's side. Kay hoped to win a reconciliation with Manaka under beneficial circumstances and held on to the position that said confidence was responsible for instigating their rush to battle. Though the alliance had gathered from 5 nations, most of its numbers were essentially defeated soldiers, and Blaze Aegis had the hand when it came to military strength. Fortunately, the local terrain favored the 5-nation alliance's defensive position. Kay's adopted strategy, known as the mobile stronghold, was a tactic which evaded surprise attacks and potential reversals of fortune by moving their headquarters around the battlefield. Kay had also mastered the magic of clairvoyance, making it possible to grasp conditions all across the battlefield without the need for direct observation. The battle progressed in Blaze Aegis's favor, and victory soon appeared to be within their sights. However, there was more to the Godslayer hero than simple strength. Realizing their position was only growing more disadvantageous, Manaka commanded 3 attendants and several angels from Light Aegis to pinpoint the enemy's headquarters. His past experience fighting alongside Kay allowed him to anticipate the Blaze Aegis leaders' use of their mobile stronghold strategy. Once the enemy's location was revealed, Manaka used teleportation magic to carry out a surprise attack without any backup whatsoever. This so-called Godslayer tactic, which it was later discovered Manaka had been using since his first campaign, long before the Void Lords, immediately put him face-to-face with Kay. Students of military strategy all agree this maneuver from the man called a hero would change the face of combat forever, and they continue to study its results as a textbook example. All Manaka had to do was seize their headquarters and demand an armistice, and the war would be over. When Manaka appeared, he rushed forward to confront Kay one-on-one, slipping past aides and knocking others out of the way. He had no intention of using Kay as a shield, but their sudden, close proximity made it difficult for others to intervene. However, Manaka's desire for reconciliation ended up threatened by a third party. Xion and the rest of his band from Ocean Aegis Even more unexpectedly, their blades were pointed at Kei. It was Manaka who helped Kei overcome shock and fight back. Despite superior numbers, Zeon and his band were driven out of headquarters by that unrivaled pair of heroes. Once the confusion had settled, Kei sat and listened to Manaka, eventually accepting his offer of an armistice. Many feel that had even 30 more minutes passed, the armistice would have come too late to save the five-nation alliance from being completely torn asunder.
Glad you're still with us. Remember to like and subscribe if you haven't yet. Now back to our story.
I can still remember the tension I felt at those peace talks. Despite my attempts to appear calm, it felt like my heart was going to leap out of my mouth. Only one other time in my life have I been so nervous, and I can only hope that my voice never cracked during my speeches.
Peace talks between representatives of Blaze Aegis and the Five-Nation Alliance began almost immediately following the armistice. Speaking for the Alliance's interests was Manaka. While in favor of unification, they opposed governance by Blaze Aegis, instead favoring equality among all of the nations. Such views did not agree with Blaze Aegis, however. After working so hard for unification, they did not wish to abandon their original efforts. When the talks began to falter, Manaka voiced a suggestion. In return for their insistence on equality, what if Kei were made the first emperor of their newly unified empire? This time, it was the rest of the Five-Nation Alliance that disagreed. Their wish was for Manaka to ascend to the throne. After all, only he had earned their allegiance. Manaka found himself in a pinch. He had no desire to sit on the throne. Clear divisions were beginning to show in the talks, and there was no sign of a compromise in sight when Kei finally spoke up with a new proposal.
I have a suggestion.
Kei said.
Manaka, you should become my husband.
Kei would immediately be crowned emperor, and the two of them would marry. The children, later born to them, would come to be seen as true symbols of unification. That was her proposition.
Surely you won't shame a woman by refusing her marriage proposal?
Kei always appeared on the battlefield dressed in masculine military attire. Therefore, many of those in attendance at the talks failed to realize her actual gender. You could hear a pin drop as her proposal drew blank stares from the audience. When Manaka awkwardly gave his consent, another brief moment of silence followed before the meeting hall erupted with shouts of joy. As outcomes went, it was the best political compromise for all sides. Everyone was in a celebratory mood as attendees set forth balancing the empire's authority with the rights of each individual nation. By the time the peace talks came to a close, the birth of a new empire had been established.
I'm sure many people interpret our decision to wed as a well-thought-out political strategy designed to achieve peace, and they are free to believe what they wish. My thoughts had been filled with Manaka ever since that first time I saw him standing heroically on the battlefield. Only my dear husband and son Kunimi need to recognize how truly joyful I am to be married for life to my first love.
The imperial government was established not in Blaze Aegis, but within the nation of Dark Aegis, where Manaka had spent much of his childhood, and that was where the coronation took place. There were no complaints heard from Blaze Aegis, however, since Kei and Manaka had decided to hold their marriage ceremony there afterwards. Kei's judgment had failed her following Manaka's loss while fighting the Void Lord, leaving her susceptible to Zeon and the power of his suggestions. In later years, it came to light that Zeon had planned on seizing the empire after unification, and now most scholars agree that the forceful invasions seen during the Imperator's Long March had never been Kei's intention. Proof of that can be found in the respect Kei received from those once opposed to her, who she then won over with the benevolence of her reign. Manaka, on the other hand, chose to support Emperor Kei quietly from the shadows and stayed out of the political spotlight. Following her death, he left the empire in the hands of her capable aides and their son Kunimi, building himself a small training hall in what had once been Wind Aegis, where he lived out the rest of his life in relative seclusion. The empire and its history began with First Emperor Kei's ascension to the throne. Following its establishment by our two heroes, what would eventually become of the empire? The answer to that question is a subject for another discussion altogether. For now, I would like to end this chronicle by simply encouraging you to reflect on all of the lives touched by the radiance of our two heroes. It is my sincerest hope that someday documents yet to be discovered will add even more details to the many footsteps these two heroes have left behind in history.
I'm glad you guys made it to the end of this video. It took a long time to create. I had to learn a lot of new things to get this done. So if you're hearing this, just know that you're greatly appreciated. Alright guys, thanks for watching. And remember, stand out, stay unique, and remain deviant.
Can't make a promise, but I do my best. 25 sitting on 25 racks. Just got started, no we ain't done yet. But a new crib, that's a goddamn flex. Sign that check. Told them last year that I've been up next. Can't take calls, but I send that text from way downtown, but the shit's still wet. Yeah, that's a guarantee. King of the city, man, they knowing that it's me. Hey, damn, you're still